Okay, so last week we stopped at antibiotics because it was such a long chapter and I had lost most of you. So we're going to pick up today talking about neurotransmitters, which we're actually going to continue to talk about a little bit in chapter 19 when we talk about chemical warfare. But basically, a neurotransmitter, there's about 50 known. What they do is they work on the parasympathetic nervous system. So basically, they're affecting your nerves, right? And don't laugh at me for not being able to pronounce these words. I still can't. At least I'm honest about it. It is in the brain and it is involved in memory, and this is honestly what is low when we're talking about Alzheimer's disease. They have low amounts of this chemical, which is why they are unable to retain certain pieces of information and memories. In the peripheral nerves, it is released at the nerve-muscle junctions, and so different neurotransmitters do a little bit different. They're not all one created equal. Different chemicals will target different neurotransmitters, and they will have different symptoms and different effects. So it just all depends on which one we're talking about. A few other drugs that we're going to talk about is, oh my gosh, adrenaline. I'm like, yes, adrenaline. Epinephrine. I drew a blank. You guys make me nervous when you make fun of me for not being able to pronounce words. Epinephrine, which is adrenaline, this is involved in your fight or flight response. Basically what happens when you start to feel the effects of these chemicals is it increases your heart rate, it makes you have a higher blood pressure, it increases the blood flow to your muscles. However, it increases your blood flow to your muscles, but it doesn't change the amount of blood you have, so the amount of blood going to your stomach, kidney, liver, and everything like that will start to decrease, and so it causes some additional issues there, which is why your adrenaline rush only lasts for a small amount of time, because if it lasts for very long, you would start to go through kidney and liver failure. Norepinephrine is in the brain. It is involved in your mood. It can control how happy or sad you feel, so on and so forth. You can also have, there's dopamine. This is involved in pleasure and addiction. This is kind of like a reward circuit. Parkinson's disease, usually there is an absence of this chemical. Dopamine can't cross the blood-brain barrier, so there's usually also some sort of precursor, and one that we use is called L-Dopa, which it's just another chemical that we put with it, and then it allows it to cross the blood-brain barrier if we need additional or if we're trying to change the ratio or the amount we have. Some other disorders that we talk about are schizophrenia. Basically what happens with schizophrenia is there is an overproduction of dopamine and norepinephrine. We need to also talk about serotonin. This regulates the gastrointestinal system, your mood, your sleep-wake cycle, your cardiovascular system, your pain perception, your appetite, and other functions. Serotonin plays a big role in just your everyday behavior, how you act, how you feel, if you're hungry, if you're not hungry, so on and so forth. It's usually this chemical. And so people with low levels of this usually act first and think later, so they're very impulsive. People with high levels are very impulsive, so they are slow to react. They always think through the situations before they do anything. Aggressive people usually have high testosterone levels and, vasopressin, and then, of course, low serotonin. Passive people have high serotonin and low norepinephrine. So it's all in like a balancing act. It's like if everything's not perfect, then it severely affects your moods and how you act and how you behave, which is why people that are usually depressed usually also have a change in their weight. It's not always necessarily lose weight or gain weight. It depends on the person, and it depends on which chemicals are being affected, but that's why they usually go hand in hand. Suicidal people usually have very low serotonin levels, which is why antidepressants usually have serotonin in them. They're trying to regulate those chemical levels in your brain. Some other drugs, honestly, it's just endorphins. They can inhibit the feeling of pain. So if we can increase, which is why when you're usually adrenaline, you usually don't feel pain. So that's why people who are like athletes, when they're in the moment, it really wasn't that painful, and they don't really feel the pain until they're rushed to the hospital and they're sitting there, because then their adrenaline rush goes away and then they can start to feel the pain, because usually they go hand in hand. Pretty sure it's supposed to be moods, but Drugs in the mind, the effects of moods of action include, well, first of all, you have your physical dependence. So sometimes there is a biochemical need, and I think we start to briefly explain the rest of the chapter because it goes really in depth. So there's I don't think it skips around. I just don't think he talks about every single thing in every single paragraph. But a physical dependence is where there is a biochemical need for a drug. Your body gets used to it. Your body needs it. If it doesn't have it, then you start to have withdrawal symptoms and you start to kind of panic, and some of your systems will actually start to shut down. There's the psychological dependence, and basically this is you think you need it, you don't necessarily need it, just like I think I need my coffee in the morning, but if I don't have it, I'm not going to die. It makes me happier. Tolerance. This is the more you take a drug, the more you have of a drug, your body gets immune to it, and so then it doesn't. You will stop to see you will no longer feel the effects of it. And so sometimes you'll have to increase your dosage in order to get the same effects that you're used to getting, which is what happens in drug addicts. That's why people start to have overdoses, is because they no longer feel the effects, so they continue to increase their dosage until it's too high of levels. There's the cross tolerance. Some drugs produce tolerance to others in the same class. So if you're taking a mixture of drugs, sometimes one drug will stop the effects of the other drug, and so you forget that you've taken it, or you feel like you need more, and so that's another issue of overdose. There is synergism, which is basically when you're mixing drugs, and basically you're mixing them trying to enhance the effects of one or both of the drugs. So sometimes if you take two drugs at the same time, you'll get a different reaction. And so sometimes doctors will actually prescribe you two medications because it's the combination that will give you whatever it is that you're trying to do. Not all of these are bad drugs. Some of them are good drugs. We have, I think that's supposed to be antagonists. But basically these agonists. These they interact with receptors and initiate the same response. And so they're mimicking maybe another chemical in your body. Maybe we can't give you an antibiotic. Maybe we can't give you a certain reaction, and so we give you something that's going to be the next best thing. And then we have antagonists, which block receptors, and so sometimes this would be like a drug that blocks your feeling of pain, or blocks your feeling of hunger, or suppressants, or anything like that. Right. Because, taking more than one drug at a time, even if you're supposed to, which is why when you go to the doctor, even if you're just sick, they ask you if you're on any medications. Because if they prescribe you something, they don't want to stop. Like if you're on a heart med, they don't want it to counteract what your heart medication is doing. Or birth control, a lot of medications will affect how well the birth control is effective, and so on and so forth. And so oftentimes they're asked so that they can prescribe you the right medication so that it won't affect what you're currently taking. So now we're going to talk about some stimulants. These are uppers. They will usually give you energy, wake you up, so on and so forth. So one of them is cocaine. Basically, this is found in chewed cocoa leaves. In 1884, Sigmund Freud introduced it for medicine, and he actually thought that it would be a good treatment for depression. In 1886, they actually introduced it into Coca-Cola as a patent medicine. And yes, Coca-Cola, like soda. It was actually, Coke started out as being a medicine, not a beverage. Because it contained actually cocaine and caffeine, and they thought that both of those chemicals would kind of feed off of each other and hopefully give good side effects. But not very quick, but relatively quickly after they did that, they realized that that's maybe not the best thing in Coca-Cola. So they removed it in 1903. In 1914, the Harrison Act classified cocaine as a narcotic, although it's technically not, and we're going to explain what a narcotic is here in just a second. We actually use a form of cocaine as a local anesthetic because it blocks the sodium channels in the nerve cells, and so it blocks you from being able to feel pain, even though pain is happening. So a lot of times this is what they do in like spinal blocks and stuff like that. Okay, some other stimulants are Why can't I not say this word? Amphetamines. Today is just not my day for pronunciation. In 1932, Benzedrine introduced it. This was very similar to cocaine, but it was not as good as an anesthetic. We didn't have quite the same effect. What this did is instead it would elevate your blood pressure. It would decrease your sense of fatigue so you didn't feel tired anymore. Basically, it's increasing the amount of blood you're receiving, so your brain is technically getting more oxygen, so it should wake you up a little bit. It induces euphoria, so you would just feel really happy and at peace and calm. They used to use it as a diet pill or a pep pill. Pep pill was like giving you energy, like an energy drink. However, now that's not the best thing, and so it's not found in diet pills anymore because there's actually kind of an addiction aspect to it. So, adrenaline rush. So some other stimulants, one that we all use is caffeine. This is, what? I can say that one?
Yeah, you're good.
This is found in cola nuts and in chocolate. Basically, this stimulates the central nervous system. You're not supposed to drink more than 2 cups of coffee a day. That's your effective dose. Most people drink more than that, which is when it starts to become some negative side effects, starts to become a problem when you have more caffeine than that. But caffeine, there's a lot of caffeine in coffee. So if you're trying to compare caffeine in coffee to caffeine in Coke, you really need to look at the amounts because sodas don't contain as much caffeine as coffee does. And energy drinks contain a lot more caffeine than 2 cups of coffee. So you should really limit the amount of energy drinks you drink because there can be... Today he's got vitamin water, so he's good. So let's talk about the opposite of stimulants. These are depressants, and there's barbiturates. Got it. Got that one. Basically, these are derivatives of barbituric acids. Basically, these were synthesized by Bayer in 1864. Legend named it that he named it after his girlfriend, but who really knows? Another legend is that it was synthesized on St. Barbara's Day, but we use these as a sleeping pill. These are very dangerous if mixed with alcohol, and they can also be used to control seizures because it relaxes the brain, it relaxes your system. So if you're having a seizure, you need to relax all of your muscles basically really quickly. Another depressant or a downer is ethyl alcohol, which is alcohol kind of like the alcohol you drink. Alcohol you drink is ethyl alcohol, but ethyl alcohol in my lab is different. What they do is they actually mix a chemical with the ethyl alcohol in like lab situations that is deadly. So if you actually drink the ethyl alcohol from like a lab supply place, it will not necessarily kill you, but it could if you drink enough of it. Basically to try to, because it's not controlled quite like the cell of alcohol is, so they wanted to make sure that people weren't drinking that for alcohol consumption. But basically what it does is it lowers your inhibitions. It depresses your motor skills. You become real lethargic. You become really tired. It depresses your brain neurons. It produces sleep. And if you drink too much, if you slow down your processes too much, it can cause you to stop breathing or your heart to stop beating or your brain to stop telling your body systems to work properly. So can be lethal. Most likely not, but there's also minor tranquilizers. This is similar to sleeping pills, but they usually have a much lower potency. They produce a very calm tension, and they can reduce your anxiety without sedating you. Librium was the most prescribed drug in the 1960s, and then they found another one. Then they started producing Valium, which is 5 to 10 times more potent, and this was the drug of the 1970s. And then we keep going, and then by the 1986, they had Xanax, which is the most widely prescribed drug in this category. It is really good for panic attacks, but it's even more addictive than Valium. And so as we get better and better at these depressants, they become also increasingly addictive. And so it's harder and harder. Doctors are not as willing to prescribe these nowadays because we know better. It's a drug that you take that people who have like panic attacks or are really stressed all the time, they can take it and it like relaxes them. So let's start talking about some narcotics now. In order to be classified as a narcotic, you have to be both a sedative and a painkiller. And not only do you have to have both of those actions, you have to also be addictive. So you have to be a sedative, you have to be a painkiller, and you have to be addictive in order to be labeled as a narcotic in the United States. So one of the biggest ones or the most obvious ones that's a narcotic is opium. This is the dried resin juice of the oriental opium poppy, which is a plant. You can dry it. It's been used since at least 3000 BC, but we don't really, nowadays it's not really used as opium. They take opium and they make other drugs out of it. And so from opium we can make codeine, heroin. Codeine is a painkiller and a cough suppressant. Heroin was actually started off being marketed in 1898 as a non-addictive cough suppressant. We know better. But now we know that it is highly addictive, and so. But I'm pretty sure that codeine is still used a little bit as a cough suppressant. I'm not. Yeah, and it's also It's also pretty addictive. Well, not. If you used it a lot, like every single night for months, it would become addictive. But if you just use it as it's prescribed, you're going to be fine. There's also hallucinogenic drugs. These basically mess with your mind. They trick your mind. They make your mind think that you're seeing things that aren't actually there. Basically, a lot of these come from plants as well. So like one example is the dried brown button from a certain type of cactus. And this was eaten by Indians in the southwest U.S. Basically, it has a very, very similar structure to amphetamine, and it also can induce hallucinations.
What's that say? You say amphetamine, but you can't say peyote.
Oh, I just skipped over it. I'm tired today. Okay. Another hallucinogenic drug is LSD. This is 4,000 times as potent as any of the other types of drugs, but it's usually not lethal. And so, I mean, most people aren't going to overdose on it. It's not going to kill you unless, I mean, I'm sure you could. But the bad part about LSD is there's been evidence to show that there's chromosome damage, which isn't going to directly harm you, but it could affect your ability to reproduce and might cause birth defects. And then, of course, if you mess with your chromosomes too much, could also affect your DNA and so on and so forth. And so, I don't know, it's not going to directly affect you, it would affect your offspring. So, which is why it took us such a long time to figure out what the effects of LSD were, because we had to wait for the second generation. And then, of course, there's marijuana. This is made from the hemp plant. This plant can actually be used in a lot of products. It is actually very strong, and so a lot of times they make rope out of it. Its use has increased during the Prohibition in 1919 through 1933. People couldn't drink alcohol, so they smoked marijuana instead. Many studies have been done on the effects and dangers. It's legal in over 14 states for medical use. It can be used to treat glaucoma. It can be used for nausea and vomiting to kind of settle your stomach. It can be used to increase appetite for people who are going through cancer treatments or various other diseases who have a hard time eating and they lose a lot of weight. It can cause them to want to eat, and so it's used a lot of times like that. There's a huge legalization debate. I mean, pro, con. Most dangerous drugs are already legal. I mean, a lot of people don't feel like it's as harmful as alcohol or tobacco on your body, and so they don't feel like it's as dangerous, so why is it illegal? The war on drugs is really not working. The supply of it is still pretty high. If we legalized it, the crime would go down. We could use our police and enforcement on other issues. As opposed to that, it would decrease the amount of money and funding we were spending on prisoners in the prison. We could use that money elsewhere to maybe fight some of the bigger battles. There's also people out there who think the government could tax drugs and then they could tax it and make money, and then they could save money on the enforcement and the jail. And so, they also think that, well, alcohol and tobacco addiction is a disease, but if you're addicted to some of the other drugs, it's a crime. And so it's kind of like, why are we punishing some people while helping other people?
I think it should be legalized.
If we educated people on the effects of some of the drugs, then maybe it wouldn't be maybe not as many people would use it, because, I mean, if you look at what happened to smokers in 1964, almost half of the adult population smoked. And as through education and the harmful side effects, and as people were brought aware, it has now decreased down to almost half, 21% of people smoke now. And so, who knows? Some cons. So why don't they want to legalize it? I mean, those all sound like pretty good pros. Why don't they want to legalize it? Well, first of all, the government feels that they have a responsibility for individual health as well as society good. That's why we control prescriptions. That's why we control the FDA. That's why we have all of these systems set up to regulate what you guys eat and what you're given and what you can buy in the store, to kind of help to protect you. And if we look at prohibition, which is when alcohol was outlawed and now it's not, the use of alcohol went up drastically, which created more cirrhosis of the liver, which increased the number of auto accidents. And so their thoughts are, if we legalize these types of drugs, their use would go up, and so then we would create all these other problems, which are indirectly an issue of the government. That would increase the amount of police that they would have to. I mean, it's already a big job just to police people drinking and driving. And so then it would be really hard for us to police using drugs and driving, because that's not as easy of a test to see if somebody is under the influence. And so it's just, again, it's an outlaw. Who knows which one outweighs the other one. Another one is not doing a good job on the use of legal drugs, alcohol and tobacco. We're not doing a very good job of maintaining these and using these appropriately. So if we release all these other drugs into the population, it would kind of be like a frenzy. Everybody would go crazy. And then how would we distribute the drugs? How would we control it? How would we tax it? How would we keep them in the right hands? How would we keep them from going into the wrong hands? What would be the age requirements? What would be the laws? And so, honestly, I feel like they don't want to mess with it because it would be so much work. So who knows?